Settle down, brother. This is the Quarter Report. South Africa is a movie. Welcome to the watch party. This is one of the most disturbing stories we have covered on this show in recent memory, because I can't think of many things more scary than soldiers in the National Defence Force going on trial for allegedly assassinating a high-ranking member of the Hawks, South Africa's primary investigations unit into crimes committed by very powerful people. But that is what kicked off yesterday in the Randburg Magistrates Court in Johannesburg. So we're going to work through this very slowly and methodically so we all understand, because this is about one of the most scary and important stories to come out of South Africa in living memory. Before we get into it, we have no time for the WhatsApp line today, but we'll get your responses tomorrow. 0607-613-436 is the number. Become a recorder, send through a voice note, send through a text, and we will have it on tomorrow's episode. There's just too much to talk about here. This is such a bombshell story that we're not even going to talk about Floyd Shivambu's latest explosion on ENCA with Gareth Edwards yesterday. It is absolutely wild. Let's start at the start. A couple of years ago, Lieutenant Colonel Frans Mathipa was killed in a drive-by shooting in his car near the Hammanskraal Toll Plaza. News 24, who, by the way, has done fantastic work covering this story in the last 24 hours, including sources and the rest. Thank you to News 24 for your work. News 24 described it as a Hollywood-style shooting, which I think makes perfect sense. So in August 2023, Mathipa was driving down the N1 highway in his VW Polo. Now, you might be thinking, Dan, why are you mentioning the car? Because later in this story, we're going to talk about another car, a BMW, and I want to distinguish it so the cars don't get confused, okay? And Eric, you are mainly here to make sure I get the story right, because as much as I've obsessed over this in the last 24 hours, there are so many moving parts. He was shot in the head as he was driving, lost control of his vehicle, and it rolled and landed in a ditch. And for the last few years, high-ranking members of the Hawks have been trying to figure out what happened to him. It was completely unclear what happened to him. But we do now know that he was involved in some seriously high-profile cases. So the first one, which is crazy, by the way, is, I don't know if you know this, but high-ranking members of ISIS, the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria, were in not just South Africa, specifically the Mall of Africa in Midrand, which I can understand why that's not in the Mall of Africa's marketing strategy. But they were, for some reason, in Mall of Africa. I don't know what they were shopping for in Mall of Africa. I haven't been there in a while. On December 29, 2022. Their names were Abdullah Hussein Abadiga and his right-hand man, Kadir Jamal Abotese, I think is the pronunciation. They were high-ranking members of ISIS, and they were kidnapped on that day from Mall of Africa, the 29th of December, 2022. They are both still missing. Nobody knows who kidnapped them. They are presumed dead, and they disappeared on the 29th of December, 2022. Now, putting aside the fact that they were part of ISIS, because I know it may sound weird that the South African state was investigating ISIS members getting kidnapped. Like, are we team ISIS or not? We are not team ISIS as a country, to be clear. But of course, our security services need to investigate all kidnappings, no matter who the people are. Mathipa was also investigating a ton of other high-profile cases. One was a syndicate that was illegally selling electricity vouchers at pretty much half price, which defrauded Eskom of millions of rands. And again, according to News 24, the 4 accused in that syndicate were ultimately found guilty on 16,451 counts of racketeering, electricity theft, and theft of a credit dispensing unit, which is so many counts. Now, I know that probably counts every single voucher they sold, which makes it slightly different. Because yes, it is a crime. Even one of those is a crime. Yeah. But when you hear 16,000 crimes, including racketeering, you go, millions of rands, you go, I don't know what that noise is, but you go,
Yeah, and those kind of scams are like still around all the time, right? Even if you're just part of a community group that you in the area that you live in, there's always some account that joins the group. It's like,
yes,
oh,
exactly.
You want cheaper electricity?
Suddenly you can have it half price. But the core thing that Mathipa was investigating was whether or not South African National Defence Force members, soldiers, were involved in the abduction of this ISIS leader, Abdullah Abadinga. So now the timing of his murder is super important because according to the Hawks, a source in the Hawks, around the time that he was murdered, he had met with high-ranking officials in the SANDF, tried to get the details of certain soldiers that he was investigating. He tried to get a hold of CCTV footage at the Mall of Africa when these 2 ISIS members were kidnapped. And apparently, according to this source, who is reputable enough for News 24 to be using, who generally have a good track record of their sources being right, the SANDF representatives refused to divulge or disclose any form of documentation around the dates of the kidnapping, and they refused to give him access to the soldiers who were under suspicion for questioning or taking down warning statements. So, of course, there is now an optics and PR battle happening. I think it is worth saying that, okay? Because this court case started yesterday. There are 12 SANDF members. So now, of course, the Hawks want to manage this situation PR-wise, and so does the SANDF. So I'm not saying that this source who spoke to News 24 is wrong or lying. I'm just saying, think carefully about who we're talking about. It's security forces trying to manage optics. So I'm not saying the source is lying, but it would be good for the Hawks to have a source like this saying that this was going on at the same time that Mathipa was investigating to make it look dodgy. By the way, as a little added tidbit from this source, apparently intelligence reports suggested that these SANDF members were behind the Lady R saga. You remember that? The Russian ship that docked in Simonstown, and then the ambassador from the United States said, without providing evidence, that arms were being loaded onto the ship to take back to Russia. And then we all, including me, condemned him, not because he was right or wrong, but because if you're going to say something as scandalous and reputation damaging as that, you need to have evidence, and no evidence appeared. According to this source, these 12 soldiers, who also later murdered Mathipa, were responsible for offloading the shipment of firearms. Is that true? Eric, this is crazy.
It really is. I thought you were going to make another weird explosion sound because, like, the amount of bombs that were up in here. It's like
Mission Impossible or James Bond.
There's too many links.
Story.
There's too many links.
It seems like these 12 former and current members of the SA Special Forces, which News 24 says commonly known as Reckies, who are involved in reconnaissance, counterterrorism, and other special forces, it was just kind of their job to be fixers, like Lady R, like dealing with Mathipa. So, what's happening with the BMW? Not the VW Polo, the BMW. Well, allegedly, the soldiers, apparently they were driving this BMW and shot out of the car and hit Mathipa not once but twice in the head and killed him. So according to court documents, nearly 2 years after Mathipa was murdered, these 7 of the SANDF gunmen faked a hijacking to get rid of the BMW. And they even filed a claim without insurance. Because that's what you would do, right? If you were hijacked, you would go as far as to file a claim with an insurer to make absolutely certain that your story checks out to get rid of the evidence of the BMW.
It's a little crazy though, because it is a bit sus that like one of the cohort that is in the docks right now, right, is the person who was apparently hijacked.
Yes, it's so weird. It is so weird. But what they didn't know, the 7 who logged an insurance claim with our insurance, is that the state, well, the Hawks, were already tracking the car. And they already knew where it was, and they could go and check, and it didn't match up with the story. In fact, the car, the BMW, was apparently on Vilakazi Street. You know that famous street in Orlando? And it just chilled there and then was taken. So they are already in huge trouble because the state has enough evidence to show that they were lying. And there is at least a fraud claim, a claim of fraud against them over our insurance, which is absolutely crazy. So again, a direct quote, 2 Hawks officers with intimate knowledge of the matter told News 24 the vehicle was dumped at a scrapyard. At first, they thought that this matter would be over because the investigating officer was murdered, but investigations began picking up momentum over the past few months, and then they realized that they needed to get rid of the vehicle before being charged. So the soldiers found out that the Hawks were making strides in the Mathipa murder case and decided they needed to get rid of the vehicle. So that's what we know so far. Genuinely, I hope this becomes one of the biggest news stories in South Africa and stays that way. There are lots of other trials happening at the moment. There's lots of noise happening from lots of different politicians. But this is about as important as it gets. Because as I started the show saying, you need your army to be reliable and trustworthy and working to the good of the country. You need your army with all of, what's it called? The monopoly on violence is what it's technically called. In all countries in the world, we allow the state to have a monopoly on violence. They are the ones with the weapons and are allowed to use them in exchange for safety and order. You know, police are allowed to have weapons. Generally, people in South Africa and around the world are not allowed to have weapons. And the goal there is to fight against crime. So we, hypothetically in a democracy, have control over the government through our votes. They're accountable to us, and the government uses the monopoly on violence that we give them through the army to keep all of us safe and run the country to our wishes. That's the structure. That's the deal that we've all signed. So if the army is going rogue and working towards specific people's interests, that's already incredibly bad and incredibly dangerous. But if the army is even going as far as to kill other members of the security apparatus, the hawks who are supposed to be working to our interests and keeping the most powerful people accountable, investigating the most powerful people, the politicians, the business leaders, and even the army. If they are assassinating our highest ranking investigators, we are in serious, serious trouble as a country.
You know, there's a couple of things I want to say here. Firstly, the SANDF has had an insane year of publicity. I mean, apart from coming back from the DRC, and we've got the one soldier stabbing two colleagues, then killing himself as well. One of the colleagues died. Just an insane amount of stories at the moment.
They lost that battle in the DRC. Then they said that they weren't at war, but they were, and then they were all kind of kept hostage for months. And then they were supposed to get a hero's welcome in Bloemfontein. Angie Motshekga, the head of the defense, was there, or at least Minister of Defense was there. But the people who flew them out of DRC gave them a different plane, and that kind of plane can't land in Bloemfontein, so they had to land at Waterkloof. So suddenly the soldiers arrived at the wrong airport for the hero's welcome. It's like farcical.
It's been insane. But I think the more important thing now, and maybe the big question that might come out of these court cases as well, is under whose orders?
Right.
Because I think this is the crux of the whole story, right? Because I think we all generally believe that these soldiers are not acting on their own here. They're not firstly abducting ISIS members by themselves, or if that's true, allegedly. And then also all of this, right? Yeah. So I think that's going to be huge. And it feels like one of those stories, and I don't want to be too dark in this moment, but at the same time, I would not be surprised if some of these members of the SANDF that are meant to take the stand go missing at some point during the story.
Yeah, of course. And I mean, if there are members of the SANDF who are now terrified because they could be arrested in future, they're implicated in some way, and they're clearly working for people powerful enough to, if the allegations are true, want firearms loaded onto a ship to go to Russia, want ISIS members to be kidnapped, and want Hawks officials to be murdered for investigations, then these are genuinely very well-connected, high-ranking and powerful people. Very possibly, very probably in politics, and very probably connected with people who are beyond politics. So this needs to be the story that we are obsessed with as a nation. Obviously, state capture is so important. We need to be equally obsessed with Ace Magashule and all of that other stuff. We need to make sure that we are moving towards a country where corruption doesn't run rife and destroy us and rotten out our state. But this is just as important and just as terrifying. So we are going to be covering this. We are going to be all over this story for a long time. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. Chat again tomorrow. Of course, WhatsApp line is there for you. I want to hear everything that you think about this. 0607 613 436. Chat tomorrow.